Well, thank you, and thank you, Pastor. And thank you for that courage. And I do have to tell one story because courage is very important. And it seems that people who love other people are very dangerous. And I was remembering a story when Anastasia made the point that Dr. Martin Luther King had spoken in this church, because a lot of younger people may not realize why that is a big deal. And I was in Texas one time at a music event, and I met some ministers. And I said, did Martin Luther King do anything in Texas? And they said, well, Martin Luther King came to Dallas. The pastor said, he said, we all ministers, we went to that airport and we met him at the plane. And we said, Dr. King, you just stay on that plane. Don't come to Dallas. We don't want trouble. And I think that's worth remembering, because some dear friends of the Schiller Institute of LaRouche, were very active in the civil rights movement. And they told us how people would cross the street so as not to be seen walking with them or interacting with them. So when I told some friends that I was coming to Michigan, they said, that's great. Because as Anastasia said, what was done here in that vote is a very big deal. And that's right. You should give yourself a hand. And the way you know it's a big deal is they're not talking about it that much, which is how you know. And my understanding is the goal was 10,000 uncommitted votes to send a message, because that's the margin by which Biden won the state of Michigan. But what you delivered was 10 times that, over 100,000 uncommitted votes. And that is why the captive people of the state of New York, under AIPAC and other nefarious agencies like Wall Street and the collaborators of Jeffrey Epstein, who are still getting bailouts, were very inspired by Michigan, because it gives hope as to what we can do. And I will say that it also indicates something which people don't understand, which is the power of the children of Gaza. Because that is the power, not the military, the power to move the conscience of people who will change history. We also had a victory over on the other side of the pond, as the Brits call it, in the UK, where George Galloway, who has been raising his voice against genocide, just got elected to the House of Commons. Another shocking blow. And therefore, we should not lose hope, but redouble our efforts, especially in the face of the latest developments, which I'm going to share with you, although you probably know most of it already. One is the next atrocity we witnessed in the city of Gaza, where food, long-awaited relief, was brought in on trucks, and the IDF opened fire on desperate, starving civilians and killed over 100 people, injured over 700 people, and then Americans have the pain of knowing that our government and our government's representative on the United Nations Security Council was the only vote to block the UN Security resolution condemning that criminal action. And when he was questioned about it, he said, "We don't know enough what really happened. We don't know the evidence." And someone in Russia was quick to point out, we didn't know what happened to the people who got shot in the head in Gaza, but somehow we knew immediately that it was Vladimir Putin who killed Navalny. And I will add, somehow we knew immediately that it was Osama bin Laden who did 9/11. And we knew immediately that it was Lee Harvey Oswald who killed President Kennedy. And we knew immediately that it was James Earl Ray who assassinated Martin Luther King. It's amazing the things that we know immediately, but we don't know who killed those people in Gaza. Now, there's another important development. I don't know if it's been covered here, which is that Russian spies managed to capture an audio recording of 4 German Air Force officers holding a conversation, which so far seems to be a real conversation, not created by AI, where they were discussing how they could blow up the Kerch Bridge, the Crimean Bridge, using the Taurus missiles that Germany has not yet sent to Ukraine, but make it look like the Ukrainians did it on their own. And they were discussing the difficulties of blowing up that bridge because they said, unfortunately, the Russians built that bridge like an airfield. It is unbelievably strong. We would have to use 10 or 20 missiles to blow up that bridge. Now, how do you think the people of Michigan would feel if someone played you a recording of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police having a conversation about blowing up the Mackinac Bridge? Would you wait to see if they actually did it? Would you take preemptive action? So this is very interesting. It indicates the evil of NATO and the West, the lies, because what's also in that tape is, again, the evidence that American, British, and French soldiers and advisors are already on the ground in Ukraine. As we know, American soldiers, Aaron Bushnell reportedly said this, are in the tunnels in Gaza fighting Hamas. What does that mean? How can anybody negotiate with the United States that is engaged in that level of duplicity? And what does it mean when our Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin tells us that if Ukraine falls, which is like saying if the sun comes up tomorrow, or if the sun came up today, because Ukraine has already lost that war, if Ukraine falls, NATO will be at a war with Russia. So we are about this close to our own self-annihilation. We have no one to blame but ourselves. But we also see the power of the powerless, and we see it in what happened here in Michigan. Now, if it is possible to show a couple slides, I just want to show you something that Jose, who's also running for office, and I have endorsed, which is a plan for the development and reconstruction of the Middle East. Is it possible? I don't know. Otherwise I'll just have to explain it. Is the slide of the Oasis plan available? Is Stuart back there? Okay, I think we'll leave it. So I'll just have to tell you that in 1975, Lyndon LaRouche made a proposal to green the deserts. He met with the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, who were willing to provide the credit. He met with various people who were in the peace faction in Israel and others. And the idea was the last internationally legally recognized borders of a two-state solution, the 67 borders, and a massive program to desalinate seawater, including nuclear power, build entirely new modern cities and infrastructure, build a major highway connecting Gaza and the West Bank, and that only through a shared mission of economic development would you be able to create the conditions where people saw the benefits of peace. Now, at the time in 1975, Henry Kissinger flew personally to Paris, France, to shut down a meeting among diplomats who were going to discuss this proposal. Later, in 1993, when you had the Oslo Accords, and remember, who were Arafat and Rabin? They were military leaders. They were people who had been in war against each other. And they said, we cannot continue this way. And Rabin said that this region can be a powerhouse for economic development together. And what happened is within about a year and a half, Rabin was assassinated by friends of the current prime minister. And people already have forgotten that anyone thought that such a thing was possible. It is possible. But again, the question is, do we demand it? And is it enough to demand merely a ceasefire if you don't know that after the ceasefire, every single child born in Palestine or in Israel is going to have the opportunity to become an astrophysicist, a virtuoso violinist, a doctor, and to work side by side in a way that contributes to the betterment of mankind. So we have to have that mission, that image, because it's not merely enough to prevent evil, but we have to get forward motion for the good. And the final thing that I want to talk about on the question of how the United States and the West, why would anybody trust the United States, Germany, France, or the UK after what has occurred? How can anyone trust the United States when we veto a ceasefire repeatedly? And that is for the American people to deal with, because the world knows that we are not all in jail. And while there is starvation in our nation, which there should not be, most of us are not starving. We have electricity. We have a roof over our head. We can gather in these places. We can get a vote, as you demonstrated. So the world and history are going to look at us. And they are going to say, if we survive, if we don't all burn in a nuclear war, and then no one's going to ask that question, if we survive, they are going to say, why did you not stop what your government was doing? Why did you allow it to happen? just as people today, and a lot of them don't know what they're talking about, because if they're not here in this room and they're not on the street stopping genocide, they have no business asking why the Germans did not stop Adolf Hitler. But a lot of us ask that question. Why didn't they do it? Well, now we see why. Because what happens if you say you're for peace? What happens if you say you're for a ceasefire? You get fired from your professorship. You get called a terrorist. You get called all kinds of vile names. You lose your friends. You are breaking the narrative. So we know why the German people failed to stop Hitler. And that was wrong. Hitler should have been stopped. And the world is going to judge us if we fail to stop this, and ask why those people in the United States who were not in jail, who had food, who had electricity, who had the means of gathering, who went in the streets, why were they unable to stop this? And therefore, it is my intention and our intention and the intention of people like Aaron Bushnell that we are going to stop this. And we are going to have to recognize in fact, we will demonstrate a principle, which is that the children of Gaza are more powerful than the British Empire or the Biden administration. Thank you.